that couldn't even be criticized, let alone overthrown, that went on forever, that supervised and invigilated your every waking moment and would not stop torturing you even after you were dead. To wish this to be true is to wish to be a slave. It is an immoral belief. I know that Daniel Dennett said something like this to you, or some of you, once before, because I heard him do it. He's a great friend of mine. Professor Stephen Weinberg, one of our greatest biologists, made the, I think, very cool and laconic observation. In an average, ordinary moral, universal moral society, people of goodwill will do such good as they can, and those who are sociopathic or psychopathic will do as much evil as it seems to them possible to do. But if you want to get good people to do wicked things, you need religion. Who of average moral sensibility would mutilate the genitals of a child, for example? Would say, here, I've had a baby. A gift from God, perhaps, who is, by the way, a perfect designer. And what could be a better instance, if you felt that, than looking at a newborn? Maybe there is a perfect design at that. But on the other hand, if we sawed away at the genitalia with a sharp stone, might look a bit better. And anyway, that's what it tells you to do. It's enough to make a cat laugh, isn't it? It would be if it wasn't so appalling, so obscene, so tragic, and so nasty. To blow yourself up in an old people's home in Netanya on Passover is to commit an action that will be praised from minarets and along the electronic media by evil old mullahs every day. No such action could be possibly endorsed by a person of average morality if it were not endorsed supernaturally. I'm sure everyone here can think of their own favorite example. And so I probably would be trespassing on your time if I went on any further, but I get the impression that, kind of you as it is to come to celebrate my birthday and all, that probably it wouldn't have been quite like this a couple of years ago. I think there's a change in the zeitgeist going on, and I have every reason to think that what I say is correct. Professors Dawkins and Dennett, who I've both mentioned, and Sam Harris, who I could add, my other musketeer, have all found in the recent past that there's a large audience now for a bit of a resistance to clerical bullying and religious lecturing and self-righteousness and nastiness and menace. That we've had about enough of all this. Open a page of any newspaper and just see what you get. His Holiness the Pope, having just repudiated limbo after a long struggle, the place where the souls of unbaptized children always went apparently was never there. Tell it, no, but it's serious. Tell it to the parents of those children. I've met them. The people who thought that's where their poor kids had gone, having died before they could breathe properly, and that's where they thought they were. It was real to them. What casuistry is this to say, oh, it wasn't really real after we made that bit up? They can't do this. It was real. It was a real place for those parents. And for the brothers and sisters of those children too. They wept at the thought of where the little one had gone. And to say, oh, never mind. By the way, we were wrong about this, but we're now ready to be infallible all over again. This is disgusting. And in the same week as he does this, the Pope repeats that we need to teach the children more about hell. Go back again to terrify the composure of the young and the innocent with these horrifying stories told them by maladjusted elderly virgins. This is wicked. This is wickedness. And we know the consequences of that, which are described in my book as follows, because I render it in Latin. No child's behind left. Crimes are committed that none of us would think of committing, but are allowed to those of faith. And AIDS in Africa, says His Holiness, may be bad, but nothing like as bad as a condom. This is not morality. Meanwhile, our Supreme Court refuses to say, as it should, that not one American dollar can be used ever for the establishment of the Jewish religion on the west bank of the Jordan River. We will not have people who want to bring on Armageddon and the Messiah. We will not treat them as friends or as allies. We should recognize them as enemies, those who look forward eagerly to the destruction of our species and our world. That Danish cartoonist can't do his job in Copenhagen without being threatened with death and his nation's tiny economy and democracy threatened with violence and coercion is bad enough that not one American news outlet would reprint those cartoons out of sheer fear. Sheer fear and cowardice is worse. And that Borders Books should pull from the magazine rack, the only magazine that I write for, it's called The Free Inquiry, I recommend it to you, would say, oh, well, we know what to do about that, we're not selling it, is even worse. How much more of this are we going to put up with? That people will come and say, we insist on teaching pseudoscience to your children in American schools with taxpayers' money. What is this? Children, the astronomy class is over. Can you now get ready for the astrology period? They want equal time? They don't want equal time. They want a dictatorship of pseudoscience and garbage. The chemistry class is over, but after the break, we'll be doing alchemy. Unless, on a condition that I propose, since George Bush in his wisdom, the man who said that Vladimir Putin is a good man because he wears a crucifix round his neck in a strong field, the stupidest thing the president has yet said, a man of faith, says that the faith-based initiative may give government money to churches, the government looks after the state looks after the rich, the churches can look after the poor, and tax breaks are given to religious institutions, very well equal time, all right, equal time. All of those churches in receipt of subsidy or tax break must now teach evolution half the time in their Sunday schools, in their religious services, and distribute the literature in their church porches. Is that what they want? I doubt it, but don't fail to take them up on it, because that's what I'm talking about. We have to fight back now. We have the consolations of humor and irony, and we have a better tradition than they do. It goes back to Democritus and Epicurus and Lucretius, and it goes through Galileo and Newton and Spinoza and Voltaire and Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine and Albert Einstein. We have a tradition that by all means understands about the transcendent, about the awe-inspiring. We have the Hubble telescope. We have the pages of Stephen Hawking. We have the extraordinary ethical scientism of Albert Einstein. We have nothing to be ashamed of. We have something really nutritious, the beauties of science and reason and the consolations of philosophy to offer people, and we're expected to be impressed by those who talk about the burning bush. So, time for resistance. To the extent that I can help to ignite it, I'm very proud for myself. To the extent that you might want to join in, I hope you will all consider yourselves incredibly welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Mr. Hitchens, I wonder if I could trouble you for a couple of things.
By all means.
Like you, I'm a refugee from the Church of England, which Alistair McIntyre described on the front of Encounter in about 1960 when Honest to God came out as, it is the Englishman's religion that there is no God and it's useful to pray to him from time to time. These are the chains we have to shake. First of all, as to the power of prayer, I'd like you to comment on the thought that it is actually demonstrated by Pat Robertson, who prays for more space on the Supreme Court, whereupon Rehnquist drops dead. This merely proves that Pat Robertson is a bad shot. And secondly, and more seriously, what comfort can you give us after all these terrific oratory, and I appreciate it, that you will not do a Malcolm Muggeridge on us and wind up an ass on the back of a donkey on BBC Two, traipsing around the Holy Land, mouthing sanctimonious pomposities.
Love it. My only dissent from you is I don't think Episcopalianism, Anglicanism, is as innocuous as all that. Yeah, I can quote you something from memory. Who said the following and when? A nuclear war would have no more effect than moving millions of people into paradise a little sooner than they would otherwise get there. Who said that? And when? Who would you guess? You would guess it was some inquisitorial Rafsanjani figure, wouldn't you? Talking about, now, that is good, that is good. He is very good. Man's good. No one else would guess, I think, that was the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1964. But he has to believe it, doesn't he? Because if he doesn't want this veil of tears to come to an end, he's not really a Christian. All we're doing here is wasting our time with our culture, our irony, our literature, and so on. That's all trash. What we really want is to be dead. And I might add, lots of other people too. On the second point, I can be won over. I can be won over the second point. George Herbert, our greatest, I think you might agree with this too, our greatest national religious poet, along with John Donne. I couldn't be without these authors. It's not that I have no sense of the numinous or the transcendent. Of course I do. Devotional music works, some of it, for me. Philip Larkin's poem on church-going is one of the most beautiful things I've ever read. George Herbert refers to the sweet mediocrity of our native church. I think he understates things a little bit. My line on it, and actually I owe the last speaker, the last question, a partial answer to. He asked, do I think they're all the same, all religions are the same? And as I said last night on the box, the answer is this, yes. Though a Quaker is obviously very different from a member of the Taliban, it's nonetheless the case that all religions, all faiths are equal glimpses of the same untruth. And they all involve the same surrender of reason and the reasoning faculty, and they involve the same contempt for evidence, and they involve the idea that one must respect someone for saying, I'll believe anything I'm told. I can't go that way. I'm the man to whom Pascal is writing when in his Pensées. He says he's addressing those who are so made they cannot believe. Well, there are more of us than you might think. And even Anglicanism can produce a hateful archbishop who has to say this about nuclear war in England in the 1960s. My analogy for it would be, and I wish I'd put it in the book, La Peste, Albert Camus, the plague. Finally, he says, as you'll remember it, the plague is over, the rats have died or disappeared. The city of Oran has returned to health, the Mediterranean is shimmering again, the white buildings have been cleaned, the people are back on the streets. But he says, and yet, the rats were only down in the sewers and waiting for the day when they could once again send themselves up to die on the streets of a free city. As long as the faith-based are around, you do not know that they will not turn their rationality to account. And it can come to you from the Pope, it can come to you from the Archbishop of Canterbury, and it can come to you from what had been for a long time a very pacific and passive religion. Shia Islam can suddenly proclaim an Ayatollah and the end of the world and the coming of the 12th Imam. You don't know. While that remains the case, I think it's right to be as skeptical of any belief as it is of any other one. On the Muggeridge point, I debated the old fool a few times on the box, and then he stopped because he did a program called In the Steps of St. Paul, of himself waddling around the Middle East with a man called Alec Vidler, who was then the Dean of Kings in Cambridge. Quite a nice old, furry old, white-haired old dean, toddling along the steps of St. Paul, and I wrote a review in which I titled it Vidler on the Hoof. And that was it for Malcolm and me.
Mr. Hitchens, I've appreciated very much your fierce and courageous support of the U.S. effort in Iraq. I raise that issue only to note that in my estimation, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, the same ideology, really secular ideology, that animated Saddam Hussein was also